The planet was a wasteland. The sky was a dull gray, and the land stretched out in all directions like a lifeless desert. Jagged rocks pierced the ground, and a strong, cold wind howled, carrying the scent of dust and decay. The surface was barren, with only the occasional small shrub scattered in the distance, no sign of life, only silence. In the midst of this endless emptiness lay a ship. Once sleek and powerful, it was now little more than a broken, burning husk. The ship's hull was cracked and smoldering, smoke rising from the twisted metal. This had been the final resting place for its lone occupant, an alien girl. Her name was Nara, though she could barely remember it now. The only thing she could focus on was the pain and the cold. Nara's breath came in shallow, painful gasps. Her chest ached with every movement, a deep, throbbing pain that wouldn't let her forget what had happened. The crash had been brutal. She remembered the explosion, the terrifying spin of the ship as it fell, the screams of her crew as they fought to survive. But she had survived. Barely. The others hadn't been so lucky. Now she was alone, stranded. Her species, the Irkali, were known for their strength and resilience, but even they had their limits. Nara's wounds were deep, her arm broken in 2 places, her side slashed by the sharp debris of the ship's remains. Blood soaked her clothes, staining the once bright fabric a dark, dirty red. But it wasn't the blood that scared her. It was the helplessness. She was alone on a desolate planet, and no one would come to save her. She tried to sit up, but only managed to wince in pain. Her vision blurred as a wave of dizziness overtook her. The crash had destroyed her communication systems, leaving her without a way to call for help. Even if she could find her way to the ship's remaining functional systems, the signal would never reach anyone in time. It would take days, weeks, maybe longer, for any help to arrive, if help ever came at all. Nara's eyes wandered across the vast landscape, but there was nothing to see. No hope. Only the endless stretch of rocky terrain and a faint horizon that seemed to mock her every move. She had no food, no water, and no medicine. The little she had managed to salvage from the wreckage was barely enough to tend to her wounds. She had done her best to clean herself up, but it was a futile effort. Her body was broken, and her spirit was nearly gone. Her fingers brushed the cold, jagged rock beside her, and she shivered from both the cold and the hopelessness that weighed heavily on her chest. Her people were known for their honor and strength, but she had been abandoned by her own kind. Her mission had failed, and she was left behind, a failure, a burden to those who once trusted her. Nara closed her eyes, trying to block out the pain. She had been through many battles in her life, fought against enemies far stronger than herself, but nothing had prepared her for this, being abandoned by the very people she had once fought for. Her mind filled with thoughts of her home, her family, and the people she once knew. She thought about the Irkali city, a place of beauty and strength where no one was ever left behind. But now, that city seemed like a distant dream. Too far, a way to reach, too long lost to even hope for. A soft sound broke the silence, distant, yet somehow close. Nara's heart skipped a beat. Was it a sound of help? A rescue team? The noise grew louder, and for a moment, she thought she had imagined. Her heart pounded in her chest as the sound turned into a thundering roar. The ground shook as something massive approached. It was too loud to ignore, too close to be a figment of her imagination. Desperately, she tried to lift her head, peering through the smoke and debris of the wreckage. Her mind struggled to make sense of what was happening. A ship? Or was it a creature? The noise continued to grow, and with it a glimmer of hope sparked in Nara's chest. Could it be someone coming to save her? Her hands trembled as she reached for the last of her strength. She had no way of knowing who or what was coming, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to hope. Perhaps the universe wasn't as indifferent as it seemed. Perhaps, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. As the sound grew louder, the air seemed to vibrate with the power of whatever was drawing near. She closed her eyes and held her breath, waiting for the answer, for the help she so desperately needed. Then, the world went still. The roaring stopped. The air was heavy with silence again. the distant noise replaced by a suffocating quiet that seemed to mock her fragile hope. Nara's heart sank as she realized the sound had vanished. She couldn't even tell which direction it had come from. Her mind was clouded with confusion. Had she imagined it? Was it all just another cruel trick of her own exhaustion? Her thoughts swirled, but she could no longer think clearly. The darkness started to close in again, pulling her into unconsciousness. As her vision blurred, she whispered to herself, "Please, someone help me." But even she wasn't sure if anyone would ever hear her. Nara's vision swirled, and the darkness of unconsciousness crept closer with each passing second. She felt the cold ground beneath her, the harsh wind biting at her skin, and the weight of her injuries dragging her further into despair. Her body was giving up, but her mind refused to let go. She had fought too hard to survive, and yet now it seemed like her strength was fading faster than she could hold on to it. But then, as if the universe itself had listened to her silent plea, she heard it again. The roar. This time, it was unmistakable. It wasn't a figment of her imagination, nor the wind playing tricks on her. No, it was something real, something powerful, something that could be her salvation. Nara's heart raced, a spark of hope igniting in the depths of her chest. She could hear the sound of an engine, a vehicle of some kind cutting through the wind and the silence of the barren landscape. Her body protested as she tried to lift her head and get a better look, but the effort was too much. Her vision blurred again and she slumped back down, her cheek resting against the cold stone. The roar grew louder, closer, until she could almost feel the vibrations of the machine beneath her skin. There was no mistaking it now. A vehicle was heading straight for her. But who could it be? No one from her species would be coming. The Irkali had abandoned her, left her to die on this forsaken planet. She could only guess who or what might be on its way. Her mind raced, the hope that had sparked within her fading almost as quickly as it had come. What if it was an enemy patrol? What if they had come to finish what they had started? Her breath quickened, panic setting in, but she couldn't move. Her body, battered and weak, refused to cooperate. She could only lie there waiting and praying that this wasn't the end. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the roar stopped. Silence. A deafening silence. Nara's pulse thrummed in her ears as she strained to listen for any sound, anything that might hint at what was happening. Had it stopped? Had the vehicle passed her by, leaving her once again alone? Just as she was about to give in to the overwhelming despair, she heard footsteps. Heavy, purposeful steps that grew louder with each passing moment. A figure emerged from the smoke and debris, moving toward her with surprising speed. Nara's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't make out the details yet, but she could see the silhouette of a person approaching, their form strong and steady. The soldier, dressed in the standard uniform of the human military, knelt beside her. He moved, with the practiced ease of someone who had seen battle, his eyes scanning her wounds in an instant. He didn't speak at first, perhaps because he was unsure of what to say to an alien, or maybe because he had seen too much to be surprised by the unexpected. Nara's vision was still blurry, but she could make out his features now. His skin was pale, not unlike the humans she had studied in her training, but there was something different about him. There was a hardness in his eyes, a depth of experience that told her this was no ordinary soldier. His dark hair was short, and his strong jawline suggested a no-nonsense personality. His eyes, though, they were the most striking. They were calm, steady, and oddly kind. He didn't speak immediately, instead reaching into his pack and pulling out a first aid kit. His movements were swift and efficient, as though he had done this many times before. Nara's breath caught in her throat as he applied a field dressing to her wounds, his hands gentle despite the urgency of his actions. "You're alive," he said quietly, his voice low and gruff. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. He didn't wait for a response. Instead, he continued his work, tending to her broken arm and the gash on her side with practiced skill. Nara's heart raced as the reality of the situation began to sink in. She was no longer alone. A human soldier had found her. But what did this mean? Why was he here? Did he come to help her, or was he another enemy who had found her only to finish the job her own people had started? She opened her mouth to speak, but only a raspy cough escaped. Her throat was dry and her words came out as a painful whisper. Who are you? She managed, her voice barely audible. The soldier paused, his eyes flicking up to meet hers. His brow furrowed slightly as if he hadn't expected her to speak at all. Name's Alec, he replied simply. I'm with the human military. We've been monitoring this sector for some time. I picked up your distress signal before it cut out. You're lucky I got here when I did. Nara's thoughts raced. He was human, the species she had fought against for years. But somehow she didn't feel the same fear she had expected. There was no hatred in his eyes, no malice in his voice. Instead, there was something else. A quiet determination. He was helping her not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Why are you helping me? Nara managed to ask, though she was almost too weak to keep her eyes open. Alec didn't hesitate. Because everyone deserves a chance, he said simply. Even you. Nara blinked, stunned by his response. She had never been treated like this before, not by her own kind and certainly not by the humans who had always been her enemies. For the first time since the crash, a small flicker of hope ignited in her chest. Alec carefully adjusted her position, making her more comfortable as he continued his work. He didn't ask questions about her past or the war that had torn both their worlds apart. For now, all that mattered was the present. And in that moment, Nara knew she was not alone. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax, trusting this human who had given her something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The wind howled through the wreckage of the ship, a constant reminder of how close Nara had come to death. Alec's careful yet swift movements as he worked on her injuries seemed like the only thing that stood between her and the final darkness that had been closing in on her for days. His presence was both a comfort and a mystery. She had no idea why he was here, what his intentions were, or how long he planned to stay. But one thing was clear. He was saving her. Her body, broken and battered from the crash, was slowly starting to feel some relief as the pain in her side dulled. Alec's medical training had been quick and efficient, his hands working with the precision of someone who had practiced this for years. He'd used a makeshift bandage to stop the bleeding, and had splinted her arm with pieces of metal from the wreckage. There was still a lot of work left to do, but for the first time since the crash, Nara felt like she could breathe. She tried to speak, but her voice was raspy and weak. How long? Her throat felt dry, and it took everything she had just to get the words out. Alec paused for a moment, looking up from his work. His eyes met hers, calm and steady. A couple of hours, maybe. I'll keep an eye on you through the night. You're going to need rest. Rest. It sounded so simple, but Nara wasn't sure she could ever truly relax again. She had spent days in pain, struggling just to stay alive. Every time she had closed her eyes, she had feared she wouldn't wake up. But now, Alec's words offered her a kind of peace she hadn't thought possible. She managed a small nod, though the effort left her feeling exhausted. Despite her injuries, despite the uncertainty of her situation, she was grateful. Grateful that a human had found her when no one else had. Grateful that, despite everything, she wasn't completely alone. Alec finished bandaging the last of her wounds, his focus unbroken as he worked. You're lucky I found you when I did, he muttered, more to himself than to her. The planet's not exactly friendly to someone in your condition. Nara closed her eyes briefly, trying to find words. She knew she should thank him, but her mind was clouded with questions. Why was he here? Why hadn't he simply left her to die like her own people had? She had no answers, but she couldn't deny the fact that he had helped her. A human had helped an enemy soldier, and that alone made her wonder what kind of person Alec was. Why did you help me? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The question had been lingering in her mind ever since he had appeared. In all her years of training, she had learned to trust no one but her own kind. Humans especially were enemies, always, fighting for control of the galaxy. But Alec, he had saved her. He didn't answer immediately, instead moving to sit beside her. He took off his gloves and wiped his hands on a cloth, his expression thoughtful. "Because I've seen enough fighting," he said finally, his voice low. "I've seen enough people die. I don't want to be part of that anymore." Nara studied him closely. She had never met a human like him. Most soldiers she had encountered during the war were ruthless, driven by duty and honor to their people. They fought without question, without mercy. But Alec wasn't like that. He had treated her with kindness, something she had never expected from the enemy. And it confused her. "I don't understand," Nara admitted, her voice strained with the effort to speak. "You're human. I'm Irkali. Why save me?" Alec met her gaze, his eyes soft but firm. "Because we're all just people, aren't we? In the end, that's what we all are. People. And people deserve to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from." Nara didn't know how to respond. His words lingered in her mind, heavy and unfamiliar. She had never considered that the humans might see things this way, that they might value life in such a simple, straightforward way. In her world, survival was about strength and power. It was about victory, and the weak were left behind. But Alec, he was showing her something different. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind continued to blow across the barren landscape, carrying with it the sense of isolation that had once defined Nara's existence. But now, with Alec by her side, that loneliness felt less overwhelming. Finally, Alec stood up and stretched, glancing around at the remains of the wrecked ship. "We'll need to get moving soon," he said, his tone practical. "The storm's coming and we'll need to find shelter before it hits. You're in no condition to travel far, but we can make it to a safe spot. I'll carry you if I have to." Nara's heart tightened at the thought. She wasn't sure she was ready to face more hardship. She was already so weak, so fragile. But Alec's determination was clear, and the idea of having a chance at survival, of having someone help her again, made the thought of moving forward a little easier to bear. "I'll manage," she said, softly, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. She had always been taught to rely on her own strength, but something about Alec made her want to trust him, to let him lead her out of this nightmare. Alec gave her a small smile, one that didn't reach his eyes but was still full of warmth. "We'll make it. You're not alone anymore." As the storm clouds began to gather on the horizon, Nara felt the weight of the world lift just a little. Alec had saved her life, and for the first time since the crash she could see a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in this cruel, unforgiving world, sometimes something was enough. As the storm clouds rolled in and the winds began to pick up, Alec moved with purpose. His eyes scanned the wreckage of the crashed ship, looking for anything that could serve as shelter or supplies. The planet was unforgiving, and though the storm wasn't the worst he had encountered, it was strong enough to make the open plains dangerous. Alec had learned the hard way to always prepare for the worst. Nara, her strength slowly returning under Alec's care, watched him with quiet curiosity. Despite the pain still throbbing through her body, she couldn't help but admire the soldier's calm confidence. He moved like someone who had faced far worse dangers than this desolate planet. There was a steady focus in him that she found herself drawn to, a kind of determination that made her feel for the first time in days that survival was possible. "Stay close," Alec called out to her, his voice cutting through the wind. Nara nodded silently, struggling to her feet. Her limbs were stiff and weak, but the idea of moving, of getting away from the wreckage, gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't want to stay here. She wanted to see more of the world beyond this crumbling ruin. Despite the pain in her body, she managed to follow Alec as he led the way. The wind whipped around them, making it difficult to hear anything over the howling gusts. But Alec didn't seem bothered. His eyes stayed focused on the horizon, his every step steady and sure. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. Nara followed silently, her thoughts racing. She had been taught to distrust humans, to view them as the enemy, yet here she was, walking beside one. Alec wasn't like the soldiers she had faced before. He wasn't cold or ruthless. He wasn't driven by hatred or fear. Instead, he seemed human, in the truest sense. He didn't judge her for what she was, and more surprisingly, he had helped her, saved her even. It was a gesture she had never expected. Her thoughts drifted back to her people, the Irkali. Her mission had been to help her species, to lead them to victory in their ongoing war. But now she felt lost, disconnected from the very people she had fought so hard for. They had abandoned her here, leaving her to die, just another casualty in their endless struggle for power. The betrayal stung deeper than any wound. She had given everything for them, and now she had nothing. But here, with Alec, there was a strange comfort. For the first time in a long while, Nara didn't feel alone. "I didn't expect this," she said, her voice soft and still hoarse from the earlier strain. Alec glanced over at her, his expression unreadable. "I never thought a human would help me." Alec slowed his pace slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm not sure what you expected, but I don't think anyone should be left to die out here." "Not like this?" Nara nodded, though the words stung. She didn't know how to feel. She had always been taught that strength was everything, that weakness would be punished. She had followed those rules, believed in them, but now she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. "I don't understand," she continued, her voice barely more than a whisper, against the wind. "Why did you save me? Why not just leave me?" Alec was quiet for a long moment. His boots crunched against the rocky ground as they walked, the only sound between them for several seconds. Finally he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I guess because it's just the right thing to do," he said simply. "I've seen too much suffering in this galaxy to just walk away from someone who needs help." Nara was silent for a moment, processing his words. They seemed so simple, yet they carried weight. She had never considered that a person might help simply because it was the right thing to do. Her life had always been about duty, about winning battles for the greater good of her people. But in Alec's eyes, the idea of helping someone, anyone, seemed to transcend that. They reached a small ridge, offering a bit of shelter from the storm. Alec made a quick scan of the area before settling down. He cleared some debris to make a small camp and gestured for Nara to sit. Nara hesitated at first, the exhaustion from her injuries and the long walk finally starting to settle in her limbs. She sat down carefully, wincing as her broken arm protested. Alec began to set up a small fire using a survival pack he had pulled from his gear. His movements were swift and practiced, as if he had done this many times before. Nara watched him, still trying to make sense of everything, of everything she had been taught, everything she had believed. But sitting here with Alec, the soldier who had saved her, Nara began to question everything. She had been raised to believe that survival was about strength, that power and honor were the only things that mattered. But Alec wasn't the strongest person she had ever met. He wasn't the fiercest warrior, yet he was the one who had shown her kindness when no one else had. The warmth of his actions was in stark contrast to the coldness she had expected from an enemy soldier. Her mind wandered back to the moment when he had first found her. She had been sure that no one would come. After all, she was a failure, abandoned by her own people. But Alec had appeared, not as an enemy, but as a stranger who saw something in her worth saving. For the first time in days, she wasn't sure what to think about the galaxy she had spent her life fighting for. Alec stirred the fire, breaking her from her thoughts. He sat down across from her, his face soft in the dim light. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice steady but gentle. Nara shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. "Better," she said, her voice still rough. It was the truth, though it didn't feel like enough. She had been through too much in too little time to feel completely at ease. "Thank you again, for everything." Alec nodded, the corner of his lips lifting into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It's nothing. You would have done the same for me." She shook her head slowly. I'm not sure I would have, she admitted, her eyes falling to the ground. I've never met anyone like you. Humans. We've always been enemies. I've been taught to see you as the enemy, as someone to be defeated. Alec's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting hers. I've never been a fan of war, he said quietly. I've seen too much of it. Too many lives lost for nothing. I know what the Urkali are capable of, and I don't want to make enemies. I just want to survive. And maybe help a few others survive too. Nara stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. He wasn't saying anything profound or grand, but it was the simplicity of it that caught her off guard. He didn't speak of revenge or duty. He didn't speak of loyalty to his people or hatred for the enemy. He simply wanted to help, to survive. And that, Nara realized, was the most human thing she had ever heard. I don't understand, she said softly. Why are you helping me? You've seen the kind of things my people have done. We've fought countless battles against your kind. Alec sat back, taking a deep breath. His eyes never left hers, his gaze steady. I've seen what your people are capable of. I've fought in battles, watched comrades fall, but I've also seen the good in people, both human and alien. You've been through something terrible, and I'm not going to leave you to die because of it. Nara's heart ached at his words, and a knot formed in her throat. She had spent so much of her life hating humans, seeing them as nothing more than obstacles to her people's survival. Yet here she was, saved by one, saved not because of a desire for power or victory, but because of a simple, undeniable compassion that she had never expected. Her mind drifted to her past, to the Urkali and their relentless ambition. She had been raised to believe in the superiority of her species, to trust in the strength of her people and their right to rule the stars. But now in this small shelter, with Alec's kindness surrounding her like a warm blanket, she began to question all of it. Was strength truly the answer? Was it better to fight and conquer? Or was it more important to help, to heal, to survive together? Her thoughts were interrupted by Alec, who stood and began pacing around their shelter. You should try to rest, he said, his voice firm but still gentle. We'll need to leave in the morning. I'll carry you if I have to. Nara watched him for a moment, a sense of gratitude swelling in her chest. Despite her injuries, despite her doubts, she felt an overwhelming urge to trust him. Maybe it wasn't about survival at any cost. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than power. I'll be ready, she said quietly, her voice steady. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to face it. With Alec by her side, she no longer felt completely alone, and that was something she hadn't had in a long time. Alec gave her a small nod, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. We'll make it, he said, as if reaffirming a promise to both of them. The fire crackled between them, casting a flickering glow across their faces. The storm outside raged on, but in that moment, in their shared warmth and quiet understanding, Nara felt something she hadn't known she needed, a sense of hope. And for the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could start over. Not as a soldier, not as an alien, but as someone who might have a future worth fighting for. The morning came slowly, as if the planet itself was reluctant to let go of the storm that had gripped it. The wind had calmed, but the sky remained overcast, heavy with clouds. Nara woke to the sound of rain gently tapping on the makeshift shelter's roof, a rhythm that comforted her even as her body groaned in protest. She hadn't slept much, the pain from her injuries keeping her on the edge of consciousness, but the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of Alec had helped her find some rest. Alec was already up, as she expected. He was packing the few supplies they had gathered, his movements quick and purposeful. His rifle was slung across his back, and a sharp look in his eyes told Nara that he was ready to move. He had been preparing for this moment since the storm began to subside, and, despite his calm demeanor, she could see the tension in his posture. He wasn't just worried about the storm, he was worried about what came next. Nara sat up slowly, careful not to aggravate her injuries. The pain in her side was still sharp, but it had lessened since Alec's treatment the night before. She watched him for a moment, his back turned to her as he methodically checked his equipment. The silence between them felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke of understanding, of unspoken bonds formed in the midst of hardship. Alec turned to face her and noticed she was awake. "Morning," he said, his voice quieter than usual. He seemed more focused than before, and Nara could sense that the day ahead was going to be more challenging than she had imagined. "Morning," she replied softly, her voice still a little rough. She looked out the small entrance of their shelter, the gray landscape stretching out before them. There was something unsettling about it now, something that didn't feel as safe as it had the night before. "We need to move," Alec said after a moment, his voice firm. "The storm's passed, but there's still a chance we could be spotted. We're not alone out here." Nara's heart skipped a beat at his words. "What do you mean? Who else is out here?" Alec's expression hardened slightly. "The enemy. They'll be looking for you. They won't stop until they find you, Nara. We've got to keep moving before they do." Nara's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this. She had hoped, foolishly, that the worst was behind them. But Alec's calm yet urgent tone told her that their fight wasn't over. She had no idea how long they had before the enemy would catch up, but she could feel the weight of time pressing on her. She was no longer just a survivor, she was a target, and the danger was real. She pushed herself up, wincing as pain shot through her side, but she ignored it. She couldn't afford to show weakness now, not with Alec depending on her. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. Alec had already begun to move, packing the last of their things. "There's a safe house not too far from here," he said. "I don't know if it's still secure, but it's the best chance we've got." Nara nodded, trusting him despite the uncertainty. They had no other choice. The storm had masked their presence for a time, but now they would have to move fast and quietly. She stood up, her legs shaky beneath her, and took a few tentative steps toward him. Her body wasn't ready for a long trek, but she couldn't afford to slow them down. "I'll manage," she said, her voice firm, though the pain was still there, biting at her every step. Alec glanced at her, noticing her struggle, but he didn't comment. Instead, he handed her a small pack. "Take this," he said. "We'll need to ration what little food we have." Nara took the pack without hesitation, grateful for the support. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She glanced over her shoulder one last time at the shelter. The storm had passed, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead made the safety of the small shelter seem far too fragile. "Ready?" Alec asked, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Ready," Nara replied. They moved quickly, keeping low to the ground as they made their way through the rocky terrain. The landscape stretched out in all directions, barren and silent, but Nara's senses were on high alert. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the enemy was out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Alec led the way, his movements precise and calculated. He knew how to survive in hostile environments, and Nara found herself relying on him more with each passing step. She had always been taught to trust in her own abilities, to rely on her own strength. But now, in this strange partnership, she was learning to trust someone else, someone from the very species she had spent her life fighting against. As they continued their journey, Nara felt a strange shift within herself. She was no longer just a soldier. She wasn't fighting for a cause anymore. The war, the betrayal, the hatred, it all seemed distant, like a story someone else had told her long ago. All that mattered now was the moment, the present, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. It wasn't long before they reached the outskirts of the safe house. Alec motioned for Nara to stay low as they approached the small building hidden in the rocks. They had made it this far, but they weren't out of danger yet. The enemy could be anywhere, and they needed to stay sharp. Alec crouched beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "We wait here until we're sure the coast is clear," he whispered. Nara nodded, her breath coming in slow, steady bursts. As they crouched together, waiting for the right moment, Nara couldn't help but think about how far she had come in such a short time. She had gone from being abandoned, alone, to relying on the help of a human soldier. And for the first time since the crash, she felt the weight of the war, of all the battles fought and lives lost, begin to shift. Perhaps she thought there was a different way to survive this. Perhaps it wasn't about power or dominance. Maybe it was about finding strength in the most unexpected of places. For now, though, survival was all that mattered. And she wasn't alone. The air was still, save for the soft rustle of the wind through the nearby rocks. Nara's heart was beating fast as she crouched low beside Alec, her eyes scanning the rocky terrain. The safe house was barely visible, nestled against the base of a jagged cliff, its weathered walls blending seamlessly with the stone around it. Alec had been right. It had once been a refuge for those who needed to hide, and it seemed to be the only hope they had left. Nara's body ached from the journey, but her mind was sharp. The adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her alert. She trusted Alec, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The tension in the air seemed to press against her chest, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't just the storm she had to worry about anymore. It was the enemy, the very people who had abandoned her, the ones who would stop at nothing to find her and finish what they had started. Alec motioned for her to stay low, and she followed his lead. The enemy was close, too close. They had to be careful. Alec had already checked the area for any signs of movement, and after a tense silence, he gave a quick nod. They were alone. For now. "We move in," Alec whispered, his voice calm but urgent. "Stay close, we don't have much time." Nara nodded, her breath shallow as they moved toward the safe house. Every step was calculated, each movement deliberate. Nara's thoughts were still racing, but she focused on the task at hand. Alec was the one leading them, the one guiding them through the unknown. She had learned to trust him in the past few days, and now, more than ever, she had to believe that together, they could survive. They reached the safe house, and Alec motioned for Nara to stay hidden as he approached the door. He checked it carefully, ensuring it was secure before gesturing for her to join him. They slipped inside quietly, the cool, damp air inside offering some relief from the oppressive heat outside. The walls of the safe house were bare, a stark reminder of the isolation that awaited those who sought refuge here. But for now it was a haven, a place where they could rest, regroup, and prepare for whatever came next. Alec moved quickly, setting down their supplies and taking stock of the situation. He glanced over at Nara, his expression unreadable. She could see the strain in his eyes, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. But his resolve remained strong. "We need to find a way off this planet," Alec said, his voice low. "The longer we stay here, the more likely it is they'll find us." Nara looked around, the walls of the safe house feeling too close, too confining. She could still hear the sound of the wind outside, but inside there was a silence that seemed even more suffocating. Her thoughts were clouded with uncertainty. She had once believed that her people would save her, that they would come for her and punish those who had abandoned her. But now she wasn't so sure. She had no allies left, no forces to call upon. All she had was Alec. For the first time, in a long while, Nara realized that survival didn't depend on the strength of her people. It didn't depend on power or war. It depended on the choices they made now, the choices she and Alec made together. "Where do we go?" she asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. She wasn't asking just about the next move. She was asking about the future, a future she hadn't dared to think about until now. Alec paused, his brow furrowing as he considered her question. "We'll figure that out," he said, though his voice lacked certainty. "But for now we need to get you to safety. We can't stay here for long." Nara nodded, though she wasn't sure what he meant by safety. The planet was still dangerous and the enemy was still out there. But Alec's words had planted a seed of hope in her, a hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and a strange sense of connection. This human soldier, who had saved her life when no one else would, had become her ally in the truest sense. They had both been caught in a war that neither had asked for, but together, they were finding a way forward. It wasn't the future she had envisioned, but it was something. It was enough. "I trust you," she said softly, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "We'll figure it out together." Alec looked at her for a moment, his expression softening. He nodded, but there was a fleeting look in his eyes, something that spoke of the challenges ahead, of the dangers they still faced. "We will," he said quietly. "But first we need to rest. You're not fully healed yet. We'll take a short break and then we'll move out again. I'm not leaving you behind." Nara looked at him, the sincerity in his words resonating deep within her. She had never expected to be in this position. She had always been taught to trust in her strength, to fight alone if necessary. But Alec had shown her that survival wasn't just about power. It was about finding strength in others. It was about hope, even in the darkest of times. She sat down, her body aching from the journey and the weight of the emotions swirling inside her. For the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to close her eyes and rest, knowing that for now, she wasn't alone. Alec was beside her, and together they had a chance, and that for Nara was more than she had ever hoped for.